This week we're going to discuss power, politics, and conflict within the organization. And to start, what is power? The Oxford English Dictionary defines power as the capacity to direct or influence the behavior of others, personal or social influence. So what we're going to talk about is the theories that have come up on how influence is used within the organizations to and how that influence is converted into power, and how politics play or come into the this power dynamic. And to start, the power and politics theory was a reaction to the ideas of all the previous organizational theories, but specifically modern structural theory and the systems theory. And the reason is that the structural and the systems theory specifically focused on the design and the management of an organization. And they posited that with rules, regulations, the right design and structure of the organization, the correct policies and procedures that were in place, and the governing of the social norms around rational decision making, that those were what were required to have the most efficient organization. And what the theorists for the power and policy or power and politics theory were reacting to was just that they saw it as being too simplistic and too naive to believe that having the right structure and the right policies and procedures in place and the rules and regulations saying what people in leadership roles can and cannot do, as well as what people would think if someone about what a good leader is and what the correct use of power, rational use of power was. They saw it as being naive, that not taking into consideration the human element, that we as human beings do many things that are irrational, especially when it comes to things like power and influence, that can make people really act and behave in irrational ways. And they wanted to understand and create a better understanding of how influence is used to change and to support or to go against decisions within the organization. The organization with the power and politics theory, also they saw it as having always being conflict. And conflict is between coalitions of people. So people or groups that form coalitions with one another. This is a coalition again, having a group of people that come together. They can be collaborating, but it's for a specific, to achieve a specific outcome, and it's usually not long term. And that there were the competing coalitions were that constant source of tension and conflict within the organization, and power and influence were how one coalition would succeed in getting what they wanted over another coalition or individual. They posited that organizations were complex systems, again, individual or group-based or coalition, and that each of the organizations have competing or conflicting interests, beliefs, values, preferences, perspectives, and perceptions, and that those all had to be managed within this organization. And then you also have to understand that conflict is inevitable, and conflict is often over influence, which turns into power and politics. And also coalitions are competing for power and influence, but also for resources. If you are working in an organization and that organization has a finite amount of resources, whether that be time, personnel, materials, funding, whatever it may be, You are competing in a sense, even if you work in an organization that seems to work very well with one another. People are competing for those resources, and those resources are going to be handed out based on whoever can show the greatest need for those resources, who can influence the decision makers into deciding that they are the ones that deserve or could best use those resources. And to just start this, to discuss this theory, I'm going to talk about one of the foundational texts in this theory or in the school of thought. But before I do, I'd like to just acknowledge the fact that we're reading all of these different theorists that have been put into the classical, neoclassical power and theory, power and politics theory, like these schools of thought. But even with the classical theorists, they didn't set out to create a theory of how the organization should run. What they did is they saw that the classical theorists saw that organizations were growing at such an exponential rate that they needed to come up with an idea to address the complexities, the issues that were coming into, and the inefficiencies that accompanied that rapid expansion. This is why they came up with that simplistic hierarchy and the rules and policies and procedures and regulations, because they wanted to address an issue. And every other school since then, so the neoclassical theorists were just individuals who saw how organizations were running at that time, the issues that those organizations had because they weren't taking into consideration the human element, and they sat down to address those issues. And another thing is that these are not chronologically, like these schools are not, and these theories are not chronological in order. That means you have, with power and theory, French and Raven, who we will discuss now, they started writing their first publication was in 1959. Theories that are still, or ideas and papers and research is still going into power and politics today. And it does not mean that like they are saying the same thing, it's just adding on to that, and they're adding to the knowledge, and that has created its own school. So when we say that power and politics theory is reacting or criticizing the ideas or tenets of structural or systems theory, these are just researchers, ordinary people who set out to understand why something is inefficient, how that is inefficient, and come up with solutions to those inefficiencies. And these are the tests and the experiments that are created. And that's also why most of the articles that we've read thus far have been from journals and not from books or anything like that. It's journal articles that have been posted to show why something is or is not the way, why it is or is not efficient. So going back to power and politics theory, French and Raven came out with their 5 bases of power in 1959. And what they had seen was through their research in the 1950s that power is in the position that you hold, that the organizations that use power and influence correctly in the most efficient way have the most efficiently working organizations. And there's 5 power bases that they identified that are still, these 5 power bases are still a lot of what our knowledge is based on today. And the first is going to be legitimate power. Legitimate power is power from a position that you have been hired, elected, or appointed to. And this is going to be called legitimate power. Legitimate power is a type of power that you don't want to overtly use. that if you are the administrator or the manager or the supervisor, you have legitimate power because your position in the structure of the organization has power and authority over the subordinate positions. If you as a leader are always saying, I'm the boss, you have to listen to me, and just because of who I am and the position that I hold, you're going to lose the effectiveness and the influence that you get from that position. Even if the workers or the subordinates are following your direction or your command, if you are overusing and really overstating the fact that you have this type of power, you're going to start to receive pushback and people really rejecting that power. And in some cases, people are not allowed to like overtly and actively reject that, but they will not be as effective or efficient in completing their task if they don't have belief in who you are as a leader and your authority. The next is going to be reward power. And this is the power that you can use as much as you'd like, as much as you can. This is money, free time, or praise. So if you can, the first two are things that we see when we're applying for positions. So the salary that you make, the benefits that you have, how much time off do you have, sick time, do you get holidays off, do you get all holidays off or just the select few, your freedom and flexibility you have in creating your schedule and changing your schedule. But the one that people really ignore a lot that is a great source of power is this power of praise. And even if you have been working in a position for a very long time and you know what you're doing, you know you're good at your job and that you're effective, someone acknowledging that, giving you a pat on the back and saying, good job, I appreciate you and I appreciate the work you're doing, that praise and that connection and making that person feel good and feel productive and valued is going to give you an influence over that person. So if you are using that and you're using praise in a way to build up your team, you're going to get that influence based on the fact that they appreciate you and they know that if they do good work that you are going to acknowledge them for that. And this is the opposite of the next base of power, which is coercive power. And coercive power is one of those things that you do not want to use. And this is when you hold a position where you have the ability to punish or sanction your subordinates, that you have the ability to write up, to fire, or to transfer an individual, or you can control whether they pass the class or if they get a promotion. You have this power, whether it's overtly used, whether you actually say this to the subordinate that, I can fire you, or if you don't do this, you're going to get a bad grade, and I give you a bad grade because I control that. Using that is going to decrease morale. It's going to make people not respect you as a person or as a leader, and it's going to demoralize people. But this is even when it's not overtly used, this is something that is useful or is a part of all organizations, because when your boss tells you to do something, whether you think about that or not, that power and that influence is still there. When they tell you that they would like you to do something, to complete a task, you know that there are consequences if you don't complete that task, and they have the ability to enact those consequences. So that's an important power base to understand. It's important to understand that you do not abuse that, and it's also important to know when someone else is abusing that so that you can address that. You have referent power. And this is like one of those powers, again, that you can use a lot. You are a charismatic person. You are someone that is well liked. You have positive relationships with people, and you are able to hold influence over people because they like you as a person. And a lot of times we connect this referent power into someone who is very outgoing and extroverted. But you can also gain referent power from as being an introverted person. It's just going to be the different ways that you interact with people. If you have a good personality, if you're an empathetic person, if you can be very soft-spoken, but if people know that when you're talking to them that you're being honest, you're being genuine, that you care, and that you're being transparent as a leader or as a subordinate among your peers, you have an influence because people like you, they trust you, and with that trust and that likability comes influence, which yields power. And then the last of the original 5 bases of power is expert power. And this is the kind of power that we assign to people with advanced degrees, JDs, PhDs, MDs. If someone is a master technician or a very experienced and highly well regarded engineer, someone that's really that's seen as an expert in their field, their expertise yields influence or holds influence over decision making. If you're having a meeting or you're having a discussion and you call in an expert, and that expert, everyone has trust, and that everyone trusts that person is an expert in what they're doing, then that expert is going to have influence over the way that decision is made, they can influence how the decision is made or what the actual decision is. Now, this is also something that if you have expert power, it's not something that you are going to use and say, if you are going around saying, I'm an expert, I have my doctorate, I'm saying this, so you don't have your doctorate, you need to listen to what I'm saying. Like, no one is going to actually respect you. Your influence is going to wane considerably if you do that. But the last base of power, which was added in the 1960s, is informational power. And this is the most controversial power, and is really debated whether or not this is actually one of the bases of power, because it's not something that you possess. Whereas if you hold legitimate power, the person, because you hold that position of power, you hold that power and that influence. With informational power, it's the information that if you have information that can help influence a decision, then it's considered to have informational power. Now, the thing is that you don't actually control the power. The power is within the information. You control the information, and once you give that information up, you no longer have that power. Additionally, this is also something that can be seen as being dubious or being kind of shady, if you want to say, that if you are using information as a commodity to get favors or to get things that you want, and that information can help or benefit your team or your organization, then you are not only using that information and that power in an unethical and immoral way, but you are creating inefficiencies within your own organization. And this is something that is the kind of power that you don't want to overuse, or if you do have this, you want to make sure that you are not using this as kind of like a weapon, or to hold influence keeping influence by withholding information that can benefit your team. And we'll discuss a little bit more of the other types of power and how politics can come in using these 5 bases of power, but also we're going to talk about some of the other theorists as well.